Summer 1959, Kansas. The young women started disappearing from Harvest Ridge after the Saturday dances. First, Delilah Pritchard vanished, a cheerful girl from Ohio who'd come west with dreams of a fresh start. Then Bertie Talmadge from Missouri. Then Corinne Westfield. All were volunteers in the government's Rural Revitalization Program, sent to help struggling farms in the Kansas heartland recover from years of drought and depression. All were full of optimism and faith in the American dream. And all dissolved into the prairie like smoke in the endless sky. If you're loving the content, make sure to subscribe right now so you don't miss us in your recommendations. We upload new, exciting videos every day. Thank you for watching. Let's get into it. The official story was simple. The girls had run off with boyfriends, couldn't handle the hard work, went back east without telling anyone. But Vera Hayworth, a 20-year-old volunteer from Indiana, knew the truth. She knew because she'd spent several days imprisoned in an earthen dugout, and only a miracle had helped her escape. And the truth was horrifying. The respected farm foreman Roderick Blackwell, a decorated war veteran with medals and commendations, had turned an abandoned dugout on the prairie into a prison for the young women he considered his wives. At least, until they bored him. Vera arrived in Harvest Ridge in late May 1959, when the prairie hadn't yet scorched under the merciless sun and was covered with young grass and wildflowers. She'd just turned 20 and was full of romantic notions about rural America. The program recruiters had told her about rebuilding communities, about how young people were transforming struggling farmland into productive territory, about serving her country and building a better future. Reality proved harsher. Harvest Ridge consisted of 24 hastily constructed buildings scattered along a single dirt road. The structures were rough wooden barracks and converted grain silos, built during the Depression and barely maintained since. At the end of the main street stood the only brick building, the Farm Services Administration Office. Next to it were workshops, equipment storage, and supply warehouses. The settlement was surrounded by endless prairie that stretched to the horizon, merging with the sky in the summer heat haze. They housed Vera in the women's dormitory, Barracks 3, with 11 other female volunteers. All were between 18 and 23 years old. They slept on metal frame beds with thin mattresses, 6 beds along each wall. In the center stood a potbelly stove, though in June it remained unlit. They washed from a communal pump in the yard. The outhouse was a wooden structure 20 yards from the barracks. Vera, raised in a modest but comfortable city home, cried the first few nights from the shock of the conditions, but quickly adapted. The girls formed a tight-knit group, supporting each other with jokes and songs. They worked the fields from dawn to dusk. Vera and the other women were assigned to weeding and crop preparation. The work was grueling. The prairie sun beat down mercilessly, reaching over 100 degrees by midday. Dust filled their eyes, noses, mouths. Their hands blistered and cracked. Their backs ached from constant bending. But Vera persevered. The sense of purpose, of contributing to something larger, kept her going. Besides, there was a stark beauty to the prairie. Incredible sunsets when the sun became an enormous red ball and slowly sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The night sky held more stars than Vera had ever seen in the city. The only entertainment in the settlement was Saturday night dances. They'd clear the main room of the FSA office, set up a record player, and the young people would dance until midnight. They played swing, country, rockabilly. The men would ask the women to dance, spin them across the floor, whisper compliments. These were rare hours of joy amid the hard labor. After the dances, the women walked back to their barracks in groups, laughing, discussing their dance partners, making plans for the future. Roderick Blackwell was one of the most prominent figures in the settlement. He was 37 years old and supervised the most productive farm crew. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a striking face and piercing gray eyes. Dark hair with silver at the temples that gave him a distinguished air. He'd served in the war, fought in the Pacific, had injuries and decorations. After the war, he'd worked on his family's farm in Oklahoma, but in 1954 he'd answered the government's call and come to help revitalize struggling agricultural communities. In 5 years, he'd become a recognized leader. His crew consistently exceeded quotas, and he'd been awarded the Agricultural Service Medal and numerous commendations. Roderick was married. His wife, Geraldine, a woman of 40, lived with him in a separate house, a small but solid structure made of sawed brick. They had no children, which in the settlement was considered unfortunate. Geraldine worked in the communal kitchen, a silent, withdrawn woman with perpetually sad eyes. Vera had seen her a few times. She served food without making eye contact, as if ashamed of something. Vera first noticed something strange on her third Saturday in mid-June. Delilah Pritchard, a vivacious girl with auburn braids who lived in the neighboring barracks, didn't show up at the dance. Delilah was the life of every gathering, constantly joking, singing folk songs, lifting everyone's spirits. Her absence was immediately noticeable. "Where's Lila?" Vera asked Bertie Talmadge, Delilah's friend. "Don't know," Bertie shrugged. "Haven't seen her since morning. Thought she was sick." The next day they discovered Delilah had disappeared. Her belongings remained in the barracks, but the girl herself was gone. The settlement erupted in alarm. The program coordinator, Clarence Morton, organized search parties. Dozens of people combed the prairie around the settlement, checked every gully, searched abandoned structures. They looked for 2 days, but found no trace. On the third day, the county sheriff arrived from town, Sheriff Dalton, a taciturn man in his 50s with a weathered face. He questioned everyone who knew Delilah but learned nothing. The girl had simply vanished. A week later, Dalton announced the official conclusion. Delilah Pritchard had abandoned her post and likely returned home to Ohio. Case closed. But Vera felt something was wrong. Delilah had been dedicated to the program, dreamed of earning recognition for her service, wrote enthusiastic letters to her parents. She wouldn't just run away. Moreover, all her belongings remained in the barracks, clothes, documents, even her program identification. What girl would leave without taking anything? Life in the settlement returned to its usual rhythm. Work, exhaustion, rare hours of rest. The Saturday dances continued. In late June, Roderick Blackwell asked Vera to dance. She couldn't refuse. To turn down the foreman, a decorated veteran, would be disrespectful. They danced to a slow song. Roderick held her firmly, almost roughly, his hand on her waist like an iron band. He said nothing, just looked at her with those gray eyes, and there was something frightening in that gaze, something predatory. "You're a good girl, Vera," he finally said. "A real hard worker. We don't have many like you." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell," Vera replied, trying not to show her discomfort. "Roderick. Call me Roderick. We're all working together here, no need for formalities." The dance ended, but his gaze followed Vera all evening. She felt him watching her from the table where he sat with other crew foremen. It was an unpleasant sensation, like being hunted. 2 weeks later, in early July, Bertie Talmadge disappeared. She'd gone to the Saturday dance and never came back. Sunday morning, the girls in her barracks raised the alarm. The searches began again. Sheriff Dalton returned, more questioning, and again, no trace. Bertie, like Delilah, had evaporated. Dalton was visibly irritated. "What is it with you girls?" he shouted at Coordinator Morton. "One after another, running off. If they can't handle the work, they shouldn't sign up." "Sheriff," Morton tried to explain. Bertie was disciplined. She wouldn't just abandon her commitment. Wouldn't, Dalton mocked. "Then where is she? Worried about coyotes? There haven't been dangerous predators here in years." The girl ran off with some boyfriend, that's all. Case closed. But whispers began spreading through the settlement. 2 girls in a month. That wasn't coincidence. Old-timers recalled legends about prairie spirits that stole beautiful women. The younger folks laughed at superstitions, but they felt uneasy too. The women started traveling in groups. No one walked alone after dark anymore. Vera couldn't get Roderick Blackwell's strange behavior out of her mind. She remembered his look at the dances, how he'd held her waist. And she noticed a detail that troubled her. Both Delilah and Bertie had last been seen at the dances, and both had danced with Roderick. Vera had watched him invite Delilah, watched him spin her across the floor, seen him whisper something to Bertie during their dance, and then the girls vanished. Vera tried sharing her suspicions with Morton, but he dismissed her. "Don't talk nonsense, Vera. Roderick Blackwell is a decorated veteran, an exemplary foreman. How can you suspect him of anything improper?" "But isn't it strange that both girls danced with him before disappearing?" "Roderick dances with many women. He's a foreman, a respected man. The girls are happy to dance with him. Stop spreading gossip." Vera fell silent, but the suspicions remained. She began observing Roderick. She noticed that in the evenings he often drove out of the settlement in his pickup truck, an old Ford. He'd head into the prairie and return only late at night, sometimes after midnight. Officially, he was checking equipment left in the fields overnight, but inspections shouldn't take 3 or 4 hours. Vera tried to find out where exactly Roderick went. She carefully questioned his assistants, the workers on his crew, but everyone said the same thing. The foreman checks equipment, maintains order. It's his duty. Nobody noticed anything strange, or didn't want to notice. In late July, Corinne Westfield disappeared, an 18-year-old from Kentucky who'd recently arrived. Corinne was quiet, modest, somewhat shy. She worked in the supply warehouse with Vera, and they'd become friends. Corinne dreamed of becoming a teacher, wanted to teach children literature. She read poetry by Whitman and Dickinson, knew them by heart, recited them in the barracks in the evenings. That Saturday, July 25th, Corinne went to the dance. Vera watched Roderick ask her to dance. Corinne blushed, looked flustered, but couldn't refuse. They danced a slow waltz. Roderick said something to her, leaning close to her ear. Corinne nodded, smiled shyly. After the dance, Roderick walked her toward the exit. Vera saw them leave the FSA office, saw them standing on the steps talking. And then, Corinne disappeared. They didn't miss her until morning. On Sunday, Vera woke and saw that Corinne's bed was untouched. The girl hadn't slept in the barracks. Vera immediately raised the alarm. Searches began, but without enthusiasm. Everyone understood searching was pointless. They wouldn't find Corinne, just as they hadn't found Delilah and Bertie. Sheriff Dalton didn't even come this time. He sent word. "Girl abandoned her post. No search will be conducted." The case was closed before it began. Panic set in at the settlement. 3 girls in 2 months was too many. Parents started retrieving their daughters, arriving angry and demanding explanations. The program administrators tried to calm people down, explained that the girls had left of their own accord, that there was no danger. But few believed it. Vera was certain. It was Roderick. There was no direct proof, but all 3 girls had danced with him before disappearing. All 3 were young, attractive, unattached. All 3 had vanished without a trace. This couldn't be coincidence. Vera decided to act. She went to the FSA director, Henderson, a heavy-set man of about 55 with a florid face and labored breathing. "Mr. Henderson," she began, "I want to report my suspicions about the missing girls." "Yes?" Henderson looked at her without interest. "I believe Roderick Blackwell is involved in the disappearances." Henderson's head snapped up, his face turned even redder. "What? Do you understand what you're saying, girl? Accusing a decorated veteran, an exemplary foreman. But all three girls danced with him before they disappeared, and he's constantly driving out into the prairie in the evenings, nobody knows where. Roderick checks equipment. That's his responsibility, Henderson barked. As for the dances, he dances with many women. He's a respected man. That's not evidence. If you spread such rumors, I'll file a complaint against you for slander. Understood? Vera backed down. It was clear no one would believe her. Roderick was too respected a figure, too valuable a worker, and she was just a 20-year-old girl who'd arrived 2 months ago. But Vera didn't give up. If the official route led nowhere, she'd act on her own. She decided to follow Roderick, find out where he went in the evenings. Find proof. Monday evening, July 27th, Vera hid behind a storage shed and waited. She knew Roderick usually left around 9. At 9:30, she heard an engine. The Ford pickup rolled out of the equipment yard, Roderick behind the wheel. The truck headed down the only road out of the settlement toward the prairie. Vera waited a minute and ran after it. She knew she couldn't catch the truck on foot, but hoped to at least determine the direction. The truck moved slowly on the rutted dirt road, raising a cloud of dust. Vera ran behind, choking on heat and dust. The prairie was settling into twilight. The sun had set, but the sky still glowed deep blue. About 2 miles out, the truck left the road and headed across the prairie. The trail disappeared in the tall grass. Vera stopped, trying to see where it was going. On the horizon stood a hill, a rise among the flat prairie. The truck was heading toward it. Vera kept running. She reached the hill and carefully climbed to the top. Below, in a small hollow, sat the truck. Nearby was some kind of structure, half overgrown with weeds, an old dugout left from pioneer days or built in the early settlement years and then abandoned. Weak light showed from the dugout, a crack under the door and a small window. Roderick got out of the truck cab, took a bag from the bed, apparently groceries, and headed to the dugout. Vera crouched in the grass at the hilltop, watching. Roderick opened the dugout door with a key, went inside. A few minutes later he came out, locked the door with a heavy padlock, got in the truck, and drove away. Vera waited until the engine sound completely faded. Then she carefully descended to the dugout. The door was solid, made of thick planks with a massive lock. She couldn't see through the window. Something blocked it from inside. Vera tried calling out, "Is anyone there?" A sound came from inside, a dull thud like someone falling. Then a woman's voice, hoarse, frightened. "Help! Please!" Vera's heart pounded wildly. "Who are you? Delilah? Bertie?" Corinne Westfield. He's keeping me here. Help! I'll get the sheriff. I'll come back. No, wait!" The voice was desperate. "He'll kill me if he finds out I talked to someone. He said he'd kill me. Please, just go. Forget you saw this." Vera wanted to respond, but heard a distant engine sound. Roderick was returning. She ran up the slope to the hilltop, hid in the tall grass. A minute later, the truck came back. Roderick got out, looked around suspiciously as if sensing a presence. He stood, smoked, then drove away again. Vera lay in the grass, trembling with horror and outrage. Corinne was there, in the dugout, prisoner of this monster, and possibly Delilah and Bertie, too. She wanted to scream, run to the settlement, rally everyone, break down that cursed door. But she understood. If she returned now and told them, no one would believe her again. She needed proof. She needed to free the girls. Vera waited for full darkness and returned to the settlement. All night she didn't sleep, formulating a plan. By morning, her decision was made. She'd free Corinne and the others herself, if they were there. She'd find a way to open the lock or break down the door and bring them to the settlement. That would be proof. The next day, Tuesday, Vera asked to access the equipment storage, saying she needed tools for work. In the storage room, she quietly took a large crowbar and wire cutters. She hid them in a bag with rags and carried them out, telling the keeper it was for cleaning the barracks. That evening, after Roderick left the settlement, Vera headed to the dugout. Carrying the crowbar and cutters was difficult, but she managed. She reached the hill at dusk, carefully descended to the dugout. "Corinne," she called quietly. "It's me, Vera. I'm going to free you now." Movement sounded inside. "Vera? But it's dangerous."
"He might come back."
"I know, but I can't leave you here. Move away from the door. I'm going to break the lock." Vera set to work. The crowbar was heavy, but she tried with all her strength to pry the lock, break the hasp. The metal wouldn't give. She tried forcing out the hinges, but they were deeply set in the thick doorframe. The work went slowly. Half an hour passed, then an hour. Vera was soaked with sweat, her hands shaking from exertion. "Are you getting it?" Corinne asked from inside. "I have to," Vera answered, though she doubted it herself. Suddenly she heard an engine. The truck. Roderick was returning. "He's coming," Corinne whispered in panic. "Run, quick!" Vera grabbed the crowbar and ran for the hill, but it was too late. The truck's headlights caught her halfway up the slope. The engine roared. Roderick gunned it, the truck charging straight at her. Vera ran, stumbling over prairie dog holes. Her heart hammered so hard it felt ready to burst. The truck bore down on her, engine screaming. At the last second, Vera dove sideways, rolled down the slope. The truck roared past, braked hard. Roderick jumped from the cab. "Stop!" he shouted. Vera scrambled up and kept running, but Roderick was faster. He caught her in seconds, grabbed her hair, yanked hard. Vera screamed in pain, fell. Roderick loomed over her, his face twisted with rage in the headlights. "You," he snarled. "I knew someone was watching. Knew it!" Vera tried to break free, but he was much stronger. Roderick twisted her arms behind her back, tied them with a leather belt. "I liked you," he said almost regretfully. "Was going to invite you proper, but you stick your nose where it don't belong. Fine, have it your way." He dragged her to the dugout, opened the door, shoved her inside. Vera fell on the dirt floor. Roderick stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the night sky. "You're mine now," he said, "like the others. You'll be my wife till you bore me, then we'll see." The door slammed, the lock clicked. Vera lay on the cold earth floor trying to process what had happened. Her hands ached from the tight belt binding her wrists. Gradually, her eyes adjusted to the darkness. A kerosene lamp burned in the dugout, giving dim, yellowish light. The space was small, maybe 15 by 15 feet. Earth walls reinforced with boards, low ceiling of logs covered with dirt. In the corner stood an iron stove. Along the walls, wooden bunks. On one bunk sat a girl. Corinne Westfield. She was pale, thin, with dark circles under her eyes. On her wrists, rope marks. "Vera," Corinne whispered. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't called for help." "Not your fault." Vera struggled to sit up. "Where are the others? Delilah and Bertie?" Corinne looked down. "They're not here. He kept them here for a while, 2-3 weeks. Then they disappeared. He said he let them go, but I don't believe it. I saw him drive away one night with a big bundle in the truck bed. A big bundle. I'm afraid that..." She didn't finish, but Vera understood. Roderick killed the girls when he tired of them, disposed of them, buried them somewhere in the prairie where they'd never be found. "How long have you been here?" Vera asked. "A few days. I've lost track of time. He comes every evening, brings food, water, makes me do what he wants, calls me his wife, says we'll live together like husband and wife, says I need to be obedient or he'll punish me." Corinne trembled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Vera felt rage and horror. This monster had turned the dugout into a prison, kept girls as slaves, and nobody in the settlement suspected anything. Decorated veteran, respected foreman. "We have to get out," Vera said. "Is there any way to open the door from inside?" "No, the door's very strong. Locks on the outside, windows too small to fit through. I tried. Delilah and Bertie tried too. Nothing worked." "What about his wife, Geraldine? Does she know?" "Don't know. He never talks about her. When I asked, he hit me and said I shouldn't dare mention her name. Said she can't give him children, so he has a right to other women." Vera looked around. She needed to think of something. In the corner lay tools, a shovel, an axe, a saw. Roderick apparently kept them here for various purposes. "Untie my hands," Vera asked. "Are your hands free?" "Yes, he unties me during the day. Says there's no point tying me up, I can't escape anyway." Corinne came over, started untying the belt on Vera's wrists. Her hands were numb, but gradually feeling returned. Vera stood, went to the door, tried pushing. It wouldn't budge. Examined the hinges. They were on the outside. The lock, too. The door opened outward, which ruled out kicking it in from inside. "The window," Vera said. Approached the small window about 12 by 12 inches. It was blocked with boards from outside. "But if they removed the boards—" "We tried," Corinne said. "The boards are nailed from outside. Can't reach them from in here." Vera thought. The axe. If they chopped at the boards from inside, they'd eventually break. It would be noisy, but there was no other option. "When does he usually come?" she asked. "Around 9 in the evening. Stays an hour or two, then leaves. Doesn't come back until the next day." Vera glanced at the kerosene lamp. Enough fuel for several hours. Now, by her estimate, it was around midnight. They had time until morning. "Help me," Vera said. She took the axe, approached the window, started chopping at the boards from inside. The wood was old, dry but thick. The axe blows echoed hollowly in the enclosed space. Vera chopped at the window boards for over an hour. Her hands ached. The axe grew heavier, but she didn't stop. Corinne encouraged her, brought water from the bucket in the corner. Finally, one board cracked, then another. Vera set down the axe, grabbed the edges of the broken boards, pulled. They gave way. Another effort, and the window was clear. A 12 by 12-inch opening. Small, but Vera was thin. She had to fit through. "You first," Corinne said. "You're stronger. If something happens, you can get to the settlement and bring help." "No, you," Vera objected. "You've been here longer. You're weaker. You need help faster." They argued for several minutes, then decided. Corinne first, then Vera. Corinne put a crate under the window, stood on it, tried to squeeze through. Her shoulders stuck. She was too broad in the shoulders. "Can't do it," she whispered desperately. "Try sideways," Vera suggested. Corinne tried turning sideways, pushed one arm through the window, then her head, then her shoulder. She squeezed through. Her legs disappeared through the window. "Made it," she whispered from outside. "Vera, come on!" Vera climbed on the crate, started squeezing through the window. It hurt. The board edges scraped her skin, caught on her clothes. She pushed her arms through, then her head. Her shoulders barely fit. After that, it was easier. She climbed out, fell to the ground next to Corinne. They were free. The night was dark, moonless. The sky was filled with stars, but they gave little light. Vera and Corinne stood by the dugout, trying to orient themselves. "The settlement's that way," Vera pointed. "About 4 miles. If we walk fast, we'll make it in an hour." They ran. The prairie at night was frightening. Tall grass rustled in the wind, making sounds like whispers. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Dry branches crunched underfoot. The girls ran, stumbling, falling, getting up and running on. After about half an hour, Corinne couldn't continue. She collapsed on the ground, gasping. Can't go on." "Come on, just a little more," Vera encouraged her. "The settlement's close." But Corinne couldn't stand. Several days of captivity, poor nutrition, constant stress, it had all sapped her strength. Vera understood. She'd have to leave Corinne here and run for help alone. "Hide in the grass," she said. "I'll bring people." Corinne nodded, unable to speak. Vera helped her crawl into the tall grass where she couldn't be seen, then kept running. She ran non-stop, though her lungs burned and a stitch pierced her side. Ran until she saw lights in the distance. Another mile, another half-mile. Finally, the barracks, the FSA office. Vera burst into Barracks 3 where she lived. "Wake up!" she shouted. "Everyone up! I found Corinne! We need help!" The girls woke, started asking questions. Vera quickly explained the situation. Within 5 minutes, the whole settlement was awake. Men grabbed flashlights, clubs, pitchforks. Coordinator Morton organized a group. "Where's Blackwell?" someone asked. "At his house, sleeping," replied FSA Director Henderson. He was pale as a sheet. "I'll go arrest him myself. If this is true, if he really—" He didn't finish, but everyone understood. If Roderick really had imprisoned the girls, it was a monstrous scandal. A decorated veteran, exemplary foreman turned out to be a criminal and predator. A group of men led by Henderson headed to Roderick's house. Vera led another group into the Prairie, to where she'd left Corinne. They found Corinne after half an hour of searching. The girl lay in the grass, unconscious. They carried her to the settlement, laid her in the barracks, gave her water. The settlement medic examined her, noted exhaustion and multiple bruises, but said her life wasn't in danger. Meanwhile, Henderson's group returned with Roderick. The foreman was in handcuffs, old cuffs they'd found in the FSA office storage, left from some previous incident. Roderick said nothing, just looked at everyone with hatred. They locked him in the office storeroom, posted guards. Henderson immediately sent a runner to town to summon the sheriff and county prosecutor. The county seat was 60 miles away, 4 hours by truck on rough prairie roads. They'd have to wait until morning. The settlement didn't sleep all night. People crowded around the office, discussing what had happened. Some demanded vigilante justice. Take Roderick out and shoot him on the spot. But Henderson and Morton restrained the crowd. "Let the law handle it," Henderson said. "We're not barbarians to lynch people. There'll be a trial. There'll be punishment." At dawn, a group of men went to the dugout. Vera led them, showed the way. When they reached the site, the sun had already risen above the horizon. The dugout looked sinister in the morning light, overgrown with weeds, half collapsed, with the boarded window now broken. They broke down the door with crowbars. Inside was exactly what Vera had described. Bunks, stove, ropes, belts. On the wall hung photographs. Delilah Pritchard, Bertie Talmadge, several other girls Vera didn't recognize. All were bound, with frightened faces. Roderick had photographed his victims. In the corner they found a journal, a thick notebook filled with small handwriting. Henderson started reading aloud but quickly fell silent, turning pale. The journal's contents were monstrous. Roderick described in detail how he chose his victims, how he lured them, how he kept them captive. He wrote about them as wives, claimed he had a right to them because his legal wife was barren, described what he did with the girls when they bored him. The last entry was dated July 20th, about Corinne Westfield. But the most terrible part came next. The journal mentioned not 3, but 7 girls. Delilah, Bertie, and Corinne were the latest. Before them were 4 others. In 1956, Tabitha Vernon. In 1957, Lorna Cassidy and Geneva Thorne. In 1958, Odette Matthews. All were also volunteers who'd come to work in the Rural Revitalization Program. All were officially listed as having abandoned their posts. Roderick kept each one from 2 weeks to a month. Then he killed them, strangled them, buried them in the prairie. The journal contained descriptions of burial locations, distances from the dugout, landmarks. Henderson closed the journal, wiped sweat from his forehead. "My God," he whispered. 7 girls. 7. And we noticed nothing. The men stood silent. Everyone understood. This was their fault. They'd blindly trusted Roderick, hadn't wanted to notice the strangeness. Girls disappeared, but it was easier to think they'd just run away. Nobody wanted to cause a scandal, damage the program's reputation, jeopardize the FSA's standing. Simpler to blame it on flighty youth. By noon, authorities arrived from the county seat, Sheriff Dalton and 3 deputies. The county prosecutor came too, a heavy-set man in a gray suit. Interrogations began. They questioned Roderick first. At first, he denied everything, said it was a conspiracy, that Vera and Corinne had slandered him out of spite, that the journal was forged. But when they showed him the photographs from the dugout, when they read excerpts from the journal written in his handwriting, he broke. He confessed to everything, told how it started in 1956, how he saw Tabitha Vernon at a dance, how she caught his eye, how he invited her for a drive in the Prairie to show her a beautiful spot, how he struck her on the head, tied her up, brought her to the dugout, kept her 2 weeks, raped her. Then she started resisting, screaming that she'd tell everyone. He strangled her, buried her in the Prairie. Thought that was it, never again. But a year later he saw another girl who attracted him, and again he couldn't resist. Roderick's testimony was detailed and horrifying. He didn't just confess, he justified himself, said his wife Geraldine couldn't bear children, that he was a man and had a right to women. Said the girls were partly to blame, coming to the program, dancing with men, being provocative. Said that in the war he'd seen how enemy soldiers treated women, and that his actions were nothing compared to that. The prosecutor listened, took notes, and his face grew harder with each word. When the interrogation ended, he ordered Roderick immediately arrested and transported to the county jail. They took Roderick away in the same truck he'd used to transport his victims, his hands cuffed, feet bound with rope. He sat in the truck bed as people came out to watch, looking at him with hatred. Some spat, some shouted curses. Roderick said nothing, just stared ahead with empty eyes. Next, they questioned Geraldine, Roderick's wife. She sobbed, swore she'd known nothing, said her husband often left in the evenings, but she thought he was checking equipment. Never suspected anything. The prosecutor didn't entirely believe her, but there was no evidence of her involvement. They released Geraldine, but she left the settlement herself the next day, went to relatives in Oklahoma, was never seen again. Then the excavations began. Following directions from Roderick's journal, they found the first burial 3 miles from the dugout. Remains of Tabitha Vernon, buried about 3 feet deep. Then they found Lorna Cassidy, Geneva Thorne, Odette Matthews. Last, they found Delilah Pritchard and Birdie Talmadge. All 6 girls had been killed by strangulation, all buried in the Prairie. They telegraphed the victims' families. Parents, fathers, brothers, sisters came, identified bodies by clothing and belongings, wept over fresh graves, cursed the program, cursed the government that couldn't protect their daughters. They buried the girls in the local cemetery near Harvest Ridge. 6 graves in one day. The whole settlement attended the funeral. People stood with bowed heads, many crying. Coordinator Morton gave a speech about how these girls were heroes, had given their lives for the great work of rural revitalization. But his words rang false. Everyone knew the truth. The girls hadn't died for any great cause. They'd become victims of a predator nobody had stopped in time. They sent Vera and Corinne for medical examination at the county hospital. Doctors found multiple injuries and evidence of assault on Corinne. Vera had severe bruising, several scratches and contusions, but Overall, her health hadn't suffered much. She'd escaped quickly. They kept both girls in the hospital for a week, observing and treating them. Then they were released. But they had nowhere to return to. News of what happened in Harvest Ridge spread across the state. Newspapers wrote about the Prairie predator, the killer foreman. The story gained national attention. Both the Rural Revitalization Program and government agencies were furious. Such a scandal undermined the entire program, tarnished the image of public service. They decided to disband Harvest Ridge. The FSA office relocated to the county seat. People were reassigned to other programs or sent home. Vera and Corinne received travel vouchers back to their home states with full expenses and compensation. But before leaving, Vera requested a meeting with the prosecutor. The prosecutor, whose name was Bainbridge, received Vera in the FSA director's office, now vacant. Henderson had been removed from his position for enabling the crimes. Bainbridge sat at the massive desk sorting through case files. "Sit down, Miss Hayworth." He nodded to a chair. "What did you want?" "Mr. Prosecutor," Vera began, "I want to ask about the trial. When will it be? And what punishment does Blackwell face?" Bainbridge sighed. "The trial will be in a month at the county courthouse. It's a serious case. 6 murders, 2 attempted murders. Under Kansas law, capital punishment. Death penalty." "Good," Vera exhaled with relief. "That's justice." "But there's a complication," Bainbridge continued. "The case has gotten too much publicity, too much attention. It's become a problem for the administration. You understand what I mean?" Vera didn't understand. "No." "The thing is, the Blackwell story casts a shadow over the entire rural revitalization program. People are starting to fear these programs. Parents won't let their daughters participate. And we need workers. We need young people. So there's talk of minimizing the publicity, maybe even softening things." Vera couldn't believe her ears. "What? Softening? But he killed 6 girls. 6! "I understand your outrage." Bainbridge raised his hand, stopping her. "And I'm against it myself. But the decision isn't mine. The state decides, maybe even Washington. I'm just warning you. The trial might be closed. The sentence might be lighter than expected. Maybe instead of execution, he'll get life. Maybe less if they find mitigating circumstances." "What mitigating circumstances?" Vera was furious. "He's a predator. He planned it, stalked them, kidnapped them, raped them, murdered them. What could possibly be mitigating?" "War veteran, exemplary worker, psychological trauma from combat, marital problems," Bainbridge listed. "You can find anything if there's an order from above." Vera sat, stunned. She'd risked her life to save Corinne and expose the criminal. Thought justice would prevail. Now it turned out justice could be bought, buried, swept under the rug for political interests. "What should I do?" she asked. "Nothing," Bainbridge answered firmly. "You did your part. You saved a girl. You exposed the criminal. What happens next? That's for the law. The law will do what it's supposed to, or what it's ordered to do from above. That's not your concern." "But it's not right!" "Right and legal aren't always the same thing, Miss Hayworth. Remember that. You're young, idealistic. You think the world follows rules, but the world's more complicated. Here on the frontier, law often lagged behind people. Settlements grew faster than sheriff's offices and courts could reach them. People lived by their own codes, their own conscience, their own rules. Sometimes that worked, and sometimes, well, here's the result. Roderick Blackwell did what he wanted for 5 years because nobody controlled him. Because he was a respected man, a hero, and everyone looked the other way. Vera was silent. She understood the prosecutor was right. Harvest Ridge was too far from the county seat, too small to have permanent law enforcement. Sheriff Dalton came once a month, no more. The rest of the time, people were on their own. And that created opportunities for crimes. "I want to attend the trial," Vera said firmly. "I'm a witness. I have a right." "You do," Bainbridge nodded. "But if the trial's closed, they might not let you in. I can only promise I'll do everything in my power to make sure Blackwell gets what he deserves." A prosecutor's word. Vera thanked him and left. Her heart was heavy. She'd saved Corinne. That was a small victory, but 6 other girls were dead, and their killer might escape just punishment for the sake of political games. Vera and Corinne left Harvest Ridge in early August. Few remaining residents saw them off. The girls they'd lived with in the barracks cried, hugged them. Coordinator Morton presented them with certificates for selflessness and courage. It felt strange, receiving certificates in a settlement being disbanded because of a terrible tragedy. But such was bureaucracy. They needed to formalize the departure with awards so everything looked proper. They rode in a truck to the county seat, from there by bus to the state capitol. From the capitol, Corinne took a train to Kentucky, to her parents. Vera stayed to wait for the trial. They put her in a hotel, gave her a room, but she could only leave with an escort. Officially, for her own safety. Actually, so she wouldn't give interviews to journalists who besieged the hotel trying to learn details. 2 weeks later, they summoned Vera to the prosecutor's office. Bainbridge informed her the trial would be in 3 days, closed session. As a witness, Vera would be admitted, but she'd have to testify strictly to the facts, without excessive emotion or commentary. After the trial, she'd have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. "Why closed?" Vera asked. "Shouldn't people know the truth?" "People know enough," Bainbridge answered dryly. "They know the criminal's been arrested and tried. They don't need details. Details only inflame unhealthy interest." The trial was held August 20th, 1959, in the county courthouse. A small courtroom, about 20 people present. Judges, prosecutor, defense attorney, a few victims' relatives, Vera and Corinne, who'd been specially brought from Kentucky. Roderick sat in the defendant's cage, wearing a gray prison uniform. He looked aged, gaunt. Only his eyes remained the same, cold, gray, emotionless. The judge read the charges: 6 murders, 2 attempted murders, unlawful imprisonment, rape. Roderick admitted to all crimes but justified himself, as he had during interrogation. Talked about the war, psychological trauma, his wife being barren. The court-appointed defense attorney supported this line. War had broken his client. He didn't control his actions. He needed treatment, not punishment. The prosecutor demanded the death penalty. Read Vera and Corinne's testimony, excerpts from Roderick's journal, expert findings. Proved the crimes were planned, deliberate, that Roderick had perfect self-control and acted purposefully. They called Vera to testify. She told everything. How she'd followed Roderick, found the dugout, been captured, escaped with Corinne. Spoke calmly, without emotion, as Bainbridge had instructed. But when asked if she'd feared Roderick would kill her, she couldn't hold back. "I knew he'd kill me," she said, looking straight at Roderick. "He kept girls, raped them, then killed them when he got bored. He killed 6 girls. I would have been the 7th if I hadn't escaped." Roderick looked at her without expression. No remorse, no shame, only emptiness. The trial lasted 2 days. On the second day, they read the verdict. Roderick Blackwell found guilty on all counts. Sentence: death penalty by hanging with confiscation of property, to be carried out immediately. Vera exhaled. Justice had prevailed, at least in this. After the trial, they took Vera and Corinne to a separate room. Waiting there was a state party representative, a man of about 50 in a strict suit. "Miss Hayworth and Miss Westfield," he began, "the state highly values your courage and selflessness. You've proven yourselves true patriots, saved a life, helped solve these crimes. For this, you've been awarded commendations from the governor, and you'll receive service medals." Vera and Corinne were silent. Medals were nice, of course, but 6 girls were dead. No medals would bring them back. However, the representative continued, "There's one request, actually, a requirement. You must sign non-disclosure agreements about case details. No interviews, no articles, no discussing what happened. This case is closed, and it must stay closed. Understand?" "Why?" Vera asked. "Shouldn't people know there can be dangers in these programs? That they need to be careful?" "People know enough." The representative repeated the same words as Bainbridge. "They know the criminal was punished. That's sufficient. If you start spreading details, it'll cause panic. People will stop joining these programs, and these programs are vital national initiatives. We can't let one criminal derail important work, understand?" Vera understood. She understood that for the administration, the program was more important than 6 girls' lives. The statistics mattered more. The plan, the campaign's success, and human lives, those were collateral damage that could be written off and forgotten. "What if we don't sign?" Corinne asked. The representative smiled, but the smile was cold. "If you don't sign, there will be consequences. You'll be blacklisted. No college will accept you. No decent employer will hire you. You'll be outcasts. Is that what you want?" There was no choice. Vera and Corinne signed. They each received copies of documents that read in black and white, "I pledge not to disclose information about the Blackwell case under threat of criminal prosecution." Then they each received $500, material assistance from the program, and were sent home. Vera to Indiana, Corinne to Kentucky. They never saw each other again. Vera returned home in late August. Her parents met her at the station, crying with happiness. They knew their daughter had been in trouble, but didn't know the details. The telegrams had been sparse. Vera told them everything, hiding nothing. Her parents listened, faces pale. "You're never going anywhere again," her father said. "No programs, no volunteer work. You'll stay here with us." Vera didn't object. She got a job at a factory in the accounting department, an ordinary, quiet life. Enrolled in night school at the business college, studied accounting. A year later, married a good man, an engineer from the same factory. Had 2 children, built a normal, peaceful life. But nightmares haunted her for years. She'd wake at night in a cold sweat, remembering the dugout, Roderick's gray eyes, the dead girls' faces in the photographs. Would wake and couldn't sleep for hours, afraid to close her eyes. She corresponded with Corinne Westfield for several years. Corinne also returned to Kentucky, also tried to live a normal life. But she had it harder. The psychological trauma from captivity ran deep. Corinne feared men, feared going outside, feared being alone. Her parents took her to psychiatrists, but treatment helped little. In her last letter, dated 1963, Corinne wrote she was feeling better, had started working as a librarian, even met a young man. Then the letters stopped. Vera learned of Roderick Blackwell's fate by chance in 1965. She was reading the county newspaper and came across a notice. At State Penitentiary number 34, inmate B. R. died while serving time for serious crimes. He was 43 years old. The initials and age matched. Vera immediately wrote to Prosecutor Bainbridge if he was still working. To her surprise, a month later, she received a reply. Bainbridge confirmed, yes, it was Roderick Blackwell. No, they hadn't hanged him. The sentence was commuted to 25 years imprisonment due to service to the nation and psychological state. He'd served 6 years in prison, working in the quarry. Died of a heart attack. Vera sat for a long time with the letter in her hands. So even the court's sentence had been changed. They hadn't executed Roderick. gave him the term he hadn't served anyway. 6 years for 6 murders, a year per life. This was justice. She wanted to write to newspapers, tell the truth, but she remembered the signed non-disclosure agreement, remembered the state representative's threats. She had a family, 2 children, a husband. She couldn't risk their well-being for revenge against a dead criminal. Vera told no one. She hid Bainbridge's letter in the back drawer of her desk, where she kept documents from the program, her service certificate, commendations, photographs. Sometimes she'd take these things out, sort through them, remember. Youth, purpose, faith in a better future, and the terrible reality that hid behind beautiful slogans. Years passed. Vera lived an ordinary life, worked, raised children, helped her husband. In the 1970s, became a grandmother. In the 1980s, retired. Lived quietly, unremarkably. But the memory of those days in summer 1959 never left her. In 1989, when openness became more common, Vera decided to break her promise of silence. She wrote a letter to the editor of a major newspaper, told the whole story. Detailed, hiding nothing. Sent the letter and waited. There was no response for 6 months. Then a letter came from a journalist. He wrote that he was interested in the story, had searched archives. The Roderick Blackwell case really existed, but was classified. In public sources, information about it had been removed. The journalist tried to access archives through the prosecutor's office, but was refused. The case was still sealed. "I'm afraid the story won't be published," the journalist wrote. "Too many influential people are interested in keeping this story buried. The rural revitalization program is sacred territory. Nobody wants to tarnish its image." Vera wasn't surprised. She'd long understood. The truth about these programs wasn't needed. What was needed was the beautiful legend of heroic young people building America. About the price of that heroism? Silence. She lived a long life, made it into the 2000s, saw the turn of the century, saw a new America. Before her death, she wrote a memoir, a detailed account of the events of summer 1959 in Harvest Ridge, gave the manuscript to her grandson with a request to publish it after her death. The grandson promised. But when Vera died in 2007 at age 68, he never published the memoir. He was afraid, said it might hurt the family, that it was better not to stir up the past. The manuscript lies somewhere in the family archive. Maybe someday someone will find it and publish it. Maybe people will learn the truth about what happened in those programs, about how young women, full of enthusiasm and faith in the American dream, became victims of criminals nobody stopped, about how the law lagged behind life in remote settlements, about how the system valued statistics and success more than human lives. But the story didn't end there. Corinne Westfield, who survived captivity with Vera, had her own fate. After returning to Kentucky, she struggled to adapt for a long time. She worked as a librarian, as she'd written to Vera, but it was difficult. Every time a middle-aged man with gray eyes entered the library, she'd start trembling, seeing Roderick in him. A psychologist her parents took her to said she had post-traumatic stress disorder. The term was new, few people knew about it. Treatment in those days was primitive. Sedatives, counseling, attempts to distract and forget. Corinne tried to forget. She met a young man, Victor, who worked at a publishing house. He was kind, patient, understanding. Learning what had happened to Corinne at Harvest Ridge, he didn't turn away. On the contrary, he supported her, helped her cope with the nightmares. They married in 1962. They had a daughter, Lorraine. Corinne tried to be a good wife and mother, but the shadow of the past wouldn't release her. She was afraid to leave her daughter alone, afraid to let her go outside, afraid something terrible might happen to the girl. Her fears transferred to her daughter. Lorraine grew up frightened, withdrawn. In 1970, Victor died in a car accident. Corinne was left alone with her 10-year-old daughter. She withdrew even more. Worked, raised her daughter, rarely left the house. Neighbors thought her strange, avoided contact. Lorraine grew up, finished school, enrolled in teachers' college, became a literature teacher, as her mother had once dreamed. Got married, had a son. Corinne became a grandmother. Her grandson, Andrew, was a bright spot in her life. For him, she tried to leave the house, walk in the park, smile. But in 1995, Corinne fell seriously ill. Cancer. Doctors said the illness might have been triggered by prolonged stress, suppressed emotions. Corinne underwent treatment but unsuccessfully. Before her death, she asked her daughter to come and told her the whole Harvest Ridge story, in detail, hiding nothing. "I want you to know," Corinne said. "I want you to remember, so that if there's ever an opportunity, you'll tell people the truth about what happened to us, about 6 girls who died and nobody was truly punished, about how the system hid the truth." Lorraine promised. Corinne died in 1996, a few days after that conversation. She was 55 years old. Lorraine kept her promise. In the early 2000s, when archives began gradually opening, she started searching for documents about the Blackwell case. She contacted Kansas archives, federal records, the prosecutor's office. Everywhere she got refusals. Case sealed, access restricted, information classified. But Lorraine didn't give up. She hired a lawyer, filed lawsuits to declassify the case. The process dragged on for years. Finally, in 2010, a court ruled the Roderick Blackwell case should be declassified as having lost governmental importance. Lorraine gained access to the archives. There were interrogation protocols, trial materials, photographs. Terrible, horrifying photographs from the dugout. 6 girls, bound, with frightened faces. Roderick's journal with all the crime details. Exhumation protocols. Lorraine compiled a detailed report based on archival materials, sent it to several publications. Most refused to publish. The topic too dark. Readers don't want to read such things. But one small online publication agreed. The article appeared in 2011 under the headline, "Forgotten Victims of the Prairie, the Story of the Harvest Ridge Predator." The article caused a stir. Thousands read it, discussed it on blogs and forums. Some didn't believe it, thought it fiction. Some were shocked. Some recalled other cases from similar programs, missing girls, unsolved crimes. Among the readers were victims' relatives. Delilah Pritchard's niece, Olivia, wrote to Lorraine, said the family had always believed Delilah couldn't have just abandoned the program. She was responsible, dedicated. Her parents died, never learning the truth. But Olivia was grateful to Lorraine for telling the real story. Other relatives responded too. Bertie Talmadge's brother Isaac, Lorna Cassidy's cousin, all said the same thing. Families had lived with uncertainty for decades, not knowing what happened to their girls. The official version, abandoned her post, convinced no one. Now they knew the truth. Terrible, horrifying truth. Lorraine proposed erecting a memorial to the victims at Harvest Ridge, but it turned out the settlement no longer existed. It had been disbanded in 1960. People scattered, buildings dismantled. Where the settlement had been was now empty prairie. Even finding the exact location proved difficult. Maps from those years were imprecise. But Lorraine didn't give up. She contacted local historians in Kansas, found old-timers who remembered the settlement. With their help, determined the approximate location. In summer 2012, she organized an expedition. A group of 10 people traveled to the site of former Harvest Ridge. Among them were Lorraine, several victims' relatives, historians, journalists. They drove in jeeps across the prairie, navigating by old maps and memories. They found the place. Remains of building foundations, overgrown with weeds, rusty equipment debris, and a cemetery, small, surrounded by a tilted fence. Graves overgrown with grass, crosses leaning or fallen. But the markers were still readable. 6 graves in a row. Delilah Pritchard, 1937 to 1959. Bertie Talmadge, 1938 to 1959. Tabitha Vernon, 1938 to 1956. Lorna Cassidy, 1937 to 1957. Geneva Thorne, 1936 to 1957. Odette Matthews, 1937 to 1958. Relatives wept over the graves. They'd brought flowers, cleared weeds, straightened crosses. Historians took photographs, recorded coordinates. Journalists filmed a report. Lorraine gave a speech, talked about how these girls were heroes, not because they worked in the program, but because they became victims of a system that valued success over people. Said their deaths shouldn't be forgotten, that we must remember not only triumphs, but tragedies. After returning, Lorraine started fundraising for a memorial, created a website, told the story, asked for help. Hundreds of people responded. In a year, they'd raised enough money. They installed the memorial in summer 2013, a small granite stele with an inscription. Here rest young women who died at Harvest Ridge: Delilah Pritchard, Bertie Talmadge, Tabitha Vernon, Lorna Cassidy, Geneva Thorne, Odette Matthews. Eternal memory to victims who perished at a predator's hands, 1956 to 1959. Relatives, local authorities, journalists attended the dedication. There was a prayer service, wreath laying. Lorraine spoke again, said truth always comes to light no matter how hard they try to hide it, that remembering those who died is our duty. The story took an unexpected turn. After installing the memorial and publishing materials in the press, another witness came forward. This was Clarence Morton, former program coordinator at Harvest Ridge in 1959. He was over 80 now, living in a nursing home in Indianapolis. Morton wrote a letter to Lorraine. In it, he confessed that all these years his conscience had tormented him. He knew. He suspected something was wrong with the girls, saw how Roderick Blackwell looked at them at dances, heard girls complaining to friends about his persistence, but did nothing. I was a coward, Morton wrote, afraid to damage relations with Roderick. He was an important figure in the settlement. Quotas and statistics depended on him. If I'd started investigating, checking him, it would have caused a scandal. I would have been told I was interfering with work, creating problems out of nothing. Could have been removed from my position, lost my career. I was afraid for my job. And because of my fear, 6 girls died. Morton asked forgiveness from the victims' families, asked Lorraine to publish his letter so people would know the whole truth, not just about the criminal, but about those who could have stopped the crimes but didn't. Lorraine published the letter. It sparked a new wave of discussion. People debated, was Morton guilty? Should he bear responsibility for not stopping Blackwell, or was he also a victim of the system that forced silence? Opinions divided. Some considered Morton an accomplice. Some a coward, but not a criminal. Some forgave him, saying in those days everyone was afraid to stand out. Everyone lived by mind your own business. Morton died 6 months after the letter's publication. Before his death, he bequeathed a small sum for maintaining the girls' graves in the Prairie. It was his attempt at redemption. But the story still didn't end. In 2015, an archaeological expedition was conducted in Kansas at the site of former Harvest Ridge. They searched for other possible burials. Rumors suggested Roderick Blackwell might have killed more than 6 girls. Maybe there were victims before 1956 nobody knew about. The expedition worked a month, surveyed the prairie within a 6-mile radius of the settlement, used ground-penetrating radar, metal detectors, dogs, found several old burials, but all were either ancient, Native American, or from World War II era. They found no additional Blackwell victims. This somewhat comforted relatives. At least all the victims were known. But the expedition did find the dugout, the very one where Roderick had kept the girls. It was half-collapsed, overgrown with weeds, but recognizable. The thick door, the broken-out window, the earth walls. Archaeologists excavated, found remains of bunks, the stove, a rusty chain Roderick had used to bind victims. All this was transferred to the Kansas History Museum. They created a small exhibit, The Dark Side of Progress. Displayed photographs, documents, items from the dugout. The exhibit sparked controversy. Many program veterans were outraged. Why display such horrors? Why tarnish noble work? But the museum didn't remove the exhibit. The museum director, Dr. Catherine Wolfe, explained, "History isn't just triumphs. It's tragedies, too. We must remember everything about heroes and victims, about great achievements and the price people paid. Only this way can we learn from past mistakes." In 2018, a documentary film came out, The Prairie Dugout, made by Kansas filmmaker Daniel Kerrigan. The film told the story of Harvest Ridge, Roderick Blackwell's crimes, the fates of victims and witnesses. Featured interviews with victims' relatives, historians, researchers, showed the former settlement site, graves, memorial, museum exhibit. Particularly moving was the segment with Delilah Pritchard's letters. Her niece, Olivia, had preserved letters Delilah sent home from the program. The letters showed a young woman full of enthusiasm. She wrote about how hard the work was, but how important, helping struggling communities, feeding America. Wrote about friends, dances, wanting to earn recognition and go study in the city. The last letter arrived a week before her disappearance. Not a word about any problems or dangers. They showed the film on Kansas public television. Then it appeared online, gained millions of views. In comments, people shared their own stories. Some recalled grandmothers who'd worked in similar programs and mentioned missing girls. Some said in their areas there were similar cases, but everything was covered up. It became clear that Roderick Blackwell's story wasn't unique. In the 1950s to 1960s, several similar cases occurred in rural programs across America. Girls disappeared, were written off as runaways, then turned out to have been murdered. But information about these cases was carefully hidden to avoid tarnishing the program's image. Historian Dr. Marcus Brightwell, specialist in post-war rural America, commented for the film. These programs were important initiatives, but conducted with inadequate oversight. Settlements were built quickly without proper infrastructure. Young people, mostly women 18 to 22, went to remote areas with no law enforcement, no real governance. Work was supervised by foremen and administrators with nearly unlimited power. Government oversight was minimal. This created conditions for crimes. Exactly how many women went missing in these programs? There's no accurate data. Official statistics weren't kept, but by conservative estimates we're talking about dozens, possibly hundreds of cases. These words caused scandal. Program veterans accused Brightwell of slander, demanded retraction, but the historian stood firm, provided archival documents, testimonies, statistics. A serious debate erupted. Society split. Some argued these programs did important work, no need to dwell on negative aspects. Others said, we need to know the truth, however bitter. Lorraine Westfield, Corinne's daughter, also gave an interview for the film. She told about her mother's fate, how the trauma haunted Corinne her whole life. My mother survived physically, Lorraine said, but psychologically she never recovered. Those days in the dugout broke her. She lived in constant fear, and I grew up witnessing that fear. It affected me too. Blackwell's crimes didn't just end 6 lives. They damaged dozens more. Relatives, witnesses, victims' children. The film won several prizes at documentary festivals. It was written about in the press, discussed online. The Harvest Ridge story became a symbol of the dark side of that era, when great things were accomplished at any cost, and that cost was human lives. In 2020, an unexpected event occurred. Roderick Blackwell's wife, Geraldine, came forward. Actually, not her, but her niece, Carol Matthews. She wrote a letter to Lorraine Westfield. In the letter, the niece explained, Geraldine had died in 2019 at age 100. She'd lived her whole life in Oklahoma, in her hometown. Never spoke about what happened at Harvest Ridge. But before dying, she called her niece and asked her to pass something on after her death. It was a diary. Geraldine's diary, which she'd kept from 1956 to 1959 while living at Harvest Ridge. In the diary, Geraldine wrote that she'd suspected her husband's crimes. Didn't know for certain, but had suspicions. First suspicions appeared in 1956 when Tabitha Vernon disappeared. Roderick came home late that evening covered in dirt. Said he'd gotten stuck in the prairie, had to dig out the truck. But there was no dirt on the truck. Then he started frequently driving into the prairie in evenings. Said he was checking equipment, but returned 3 or 4 hours later. What could take so long to check? Geraldine tried asking, but Roderick got angry, told her to mind her own business. Once he came home with a scratch on his face, said he'd caught it on a bush, but the scratch looked like someone had clawed him with fingernails. Women's fingernails. Geraldine started watching her husband. One night when Roderick left, she tried following him, but he took the truck and she was on foot, couldn't catch up. Another time she searched the truck, found under a tarp in the bed, rope, a knife, a woman's scarf. Asked Roderick whose scarf. He snatched it from her hands, said he'd found it on the road. After Delilah Pritchard's disappearance in 1959, Geraldine had little doubt. But what could she do? Go to the sheriff with suspicions about her husband? Nobody would listen. Roderick was a decorated veteran, respected man, and she was just a wife, barren at that. Her words meant nothing. When Roderick was arrested, Geraldine felt relief and horror simultaneously. Relief, the nightmare was over. Horror, she'd been married to a monster. She'd lived beside him, cooked his meals, slept in the same bed, and done nothing. Geraldine left the settlement the day after the arrest, returned to her hometown, took her maiden name, never told anyone she'd been married to Blackwell. Lived alone, worked on farms. After retirement, stayed home, rarely went out, was tormented by guilt her whole life. In the diary was an entry made the day before her death. I knew, I suspected, but I did nothing. I'm as guilty as he was. Forgive me, girls. Forgive me for not saving you. Lorraine Westfield published Geraldine's diary online. Again, discussions began. Some condemned Geraldine. How could she stay silent? Some pitied her. She was a victim herself, lived in fear, couldn't oppose her husband. Historian Dr. Brightwell commented, Geraldine was a typical figure of her time, a woman completely dependent on her husband. In those days, a wife couldn't go against her husband. Nobody would support her. On the contrary, she'd be condemned for airing dirty laundry. The system gave women no way to protect themselves or others. Geraldine did what she could, stayed silent, and suffered. Hard to blame her. Victims' relatives reacted differently to the diary. Delilah Pritchard's niece, Olivia, said, I can't forgive Geraldine. She could have saved my aunt, could have at least written an anonymous tip to the sheriff. But she did nothing. Her guilt isn't as terrible as Roderick's, but it exists. Bertie Talmadge's brother Isaac was gentler. Geraldine lived a life of torment. That's punishment enough. I won't judge her. Let God judge. The Harvest Ridge story continues to resonate. In 2023, a permanent exhibit opened at the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., titled Forgotten Voices: The Hidden Cost of Progress. The exhibit includes the Harvest Ridge case alongside other historical tragedies from various American development programs. The exhibit features Vera Hayworth's original memoir manuscript, photographs from the Dugout, Roderick's journal, in a sealed case for preservation, and personal effects of the victims. Interactive displays allow visitors to hear recorded interviews with survivors and families, read letters, and understand the context of the era. Perhaps most powerfully, the exhibit ends with a wall bearing the names of over 200 young women who disappeared from rural development programs between 1945 and 1970, cases that were never fully investigated or resolved. Harvest Ridge was not unique. It was simply the case that finally came to light. Vera Hayworth's grandson, who had kept her memoir unpublished for so long, finally released it in 2021. In his introduction, he wrote, "I was afraid of this story for years, afraid of what it might mean for our family, afraid of reopening old wounds. But I've come to understand that silence protects no one. The truth, however painful, serves the memory of those who suffered better than comfortable lies ever could." The book became a bestseller. Vera's clear-eyed, unflinching account of those terrible days reached millions. Schools began using it in history classes. Podcasts discussed it. Survivors of similar traumas reached out, saying her words helped them process their own experiences. In Harvest Ridge's former location, the memorial has become a place of pilgrimage. Every summer, on the anniversary of the girls' deaths, people gather there. They bring flowers, they read the names, they promise to remember. Local high school students maintain the site as a community service project. The prairie wind still blows across those endless grasslands, just as it did in 1959. But now, instead of silence and secrets, there are voices. The voices of Delilah, Birdie, Corinne, Tabitha, Lorna, Geneva, and Odette. The voice of Vera, who risked everything to tell the truth. The voices of all those who refused to let this darkness be forgotten. History remembers, and in remembering, we honor not just the dead, but our obligation to the living, to create a world where such tragedies cannot hide in shadows, where justice cannot be bought or buried, where every life matters more than any statistic or program or political convenience. The dugout in the prairie is gone now, reclaimed by the earth, but its story endures. A reminder that progress built on silence and buried truths is no progress at all.